See, it's catchy.
Yeah. Various sources document that in the early 1990s, autism diagnoses increased dramatically. I found a statistic on about.com that said that between 1993 and 2003, the number of American school children being diagnosed with autism increased by more than 800%. The Centers for Disease Control released a finding in 2007 that nearly 1 in 150 8-year-olds have an autism spectrum disorder. And a more conservative estimate is 1 in 300 people. But are we seeing an epidemic, or have we merely gained a clearer picture of what autism is about? This question has personal relevance for me because in June 2007, I learned that I have Asperger's syndrome, which is on the autism spectrum. And if there's any one key word that encapsulates what I believe we are seeing happen, is autism spectrum. It reflects a substantial change in the way that autism is diagnosed. The CDC describes an autism spectrum disorder as impacting social interaction, communication, unusual behaviors and interests. You generally detect an ASD before the age of 3, and it pretty much lasts for a person's entire life. A really excellent history of the diagnosis can be found in a book by Roy Richard Brinker. It's called Unstrange Minds. He basically tells about how a doctor named Leo Connor here in the U.S. in about 1943 did a study of about 11 children. These children were, in all other respects, different, but they all shared linguistic and social impairments. And he came up with the adjective autistic to describe what these children were experiencing. Now, at nearly the same time, but on the other side of the Atlantic, a doctor named Hans Asperger did a separate study of 450 children, and his findings suggested that autism manifested a spectrum of severities, but his findings just kind of stayed on the other side of the Atlantic for many, many years. Now, another factor that was going on was something called diagnostic substitution, and basically what that means is autism wasn't being diagnosed. It was paired as an adjective at first with schizophrenia, and so other labels were being given to people. When I was a child growing up, my stepmother told me I was retarded once. She actually came right out and said, "You're retarded." And you would see more severely challenged individuals being labeled mentally retarded, schizophrenic, and so it wasn't until 1991 a thing called the Autism Diagnostic Interview was published, and in 1992 the, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 4th version, actually had autism, and the 4th edition actually gave us the spectrum criteria. For the first time, it enlarged the criteria. There's a whole bunch of them. PDD, which is pervasive developmental disorder, they can all be lumped under the term autism, but they reflect varying degrees of severities. And so basically, as it was summed up by about.com, in essence, it became possible for someone to be very autistic or mildly autistic. Now, another really important change that happened in 1990 was that for the first time, autism became a category under special education law, where if you had autism, you were guaranteed certain individually designed instruction. And so now you started, this eliminated things like diagnostic substitution, instead of autism. An interesting thing happened, though, is that a child who might have gotten another diagnosis, but whose traits could be described as autism, they would apply this label because it got the services that this child needed. And Dr. Tony Atwood, one of the most highly respected in the autism and Asperger's field, even brought up in one of his books, clinicians will give the diagnosis that will get the treatment the child or the adult needs. Now, with the addition of autism as a category under special education law, schools began documenting autism for the first time as an educational statistic. Now, up until this point, there really hadn't been any record keeping to the degree that it is now. And so when you throw out a statistic like 1 in 150, there's really nothing to compare it to under the same exact set of circumstances. It sort of just has to stand by itself. And so in conclusion, autism has gone in my lifetime from limited and specific criteria that eliminated, disqualified many people, to criteria that acknowledges varying degrees of severity. We are seeing more cases of autism because we are learning where and how to look. And so the only epidemic is in the sense maybe of critical mass. It's gotten so much attention that it's in the public eye in a way that it has never been before. But I don't really see that as an issue for concern. Instead, I see it as a cause for celebration and rejoicing, because it means more people who may need help may be getting that help. And even those of us who we might not need help because we've learned to cope on our own, our concerns about previous issues are being assuaged because now we have an explanation for why we went through some of the things we went through.
Good job. Good job.